Dr. Brand, may I ask you what is the history background of FFC?
I think that story is a very interesting, both creative and innovative story. It's one I'm really proud of because it started at a breakfast meeting in Hong Kong with two of the founders of New Life International, in which I was talking at that breakfast about the technological developments that were occurring in the extraction of agents that were health promoting out of various foods. And I was saying that it's very interesting at that time, this was 1991, 92, that the chemistry was just starting to be developed to allow these important nutrients that were in foods to be concentrated out of foods without destroying them by new, very gentle techniques, gentle isolating techniques. And that with that also was the recognition that these substances had very unique abilities to have effects upon the function of the individual, their health function. And I said, you know, it seems that these two discoveries, the discovery of how to concentrate these things out of foods, making them still retain their potency, and the effects that they were having on function of a person in their health, could create a whole new class of nutritional products that had never been seen before. And I just threw out the term functional food concentrates, because they weren't dietary supplements and they weren't nutraceuticals. They were really substances that would retain all the value in the foods, this orchestration of the value, like if you think of these nutrients that are in certain foods as being like an orchestra, where you have many different instruments all playing and you need them all together to make the music sound right, that by keeping them able to be extracted safely, we could concentrate them and they would have a function that was specific on the health of the person. So they would be functional food concentrates. And when I gave this concept up at that moment, both the two New Life founders said, wow, that's a really interesting concept. We ought to really think seriously about that. And that was really the start of the concept.
I see, that's interesting. Could you also tell us a bit more about the development of the brand FFC?
Yes, so from that first meeting in which I threw out the concept of functional food concentrates, and we started to collaborate and discuss more what that would mean, and could you develop a series of products and services and focus of a company, New Life International, that would use this approach towards improving people's health. We really got into this really beautiful synergy of different creative thoughts about how this could be made into a really new way of approaching people's health by improving their function. And I think that function was an important term because we weren't really talking just strictly about preventing disease, and we weren't talking about treating disease. We were talking about functionally improving a person across the range of their function, which is their physical function and their physiological function or their metabolic function, their cognitive or thinking function, and their spiritual, psychological, behavioral function. So we thought, could we then design products that would help in each of these areas by using this concept of functional food concentrates, and from that then the kind of diversity of products and the brand started to develop that I was so pleased to see that the leaders and the innovators and the owners of that concept were the people at New Life International.
So are there any differences between food supplements, nutraceuticals, and FFC?
Yes, I think there really is a very important difference among those three categories. So dietary supplements are what I would call kind of certain nutrients that have been manufactured to be supplemented to a person's diet to make up for deficiencies in their diet. It could be vitamins or minerals or amino acids or fatty acids. And so it was really supplementing a diet that was deficient in those nutrients. And there's a role for those as kind of general nutrient supplements. Then the nutraceuticals were specific high potency formulas that have very high levels of certain things, almost like using nutrients as drugs to treat certain kinds of conditions. That would be like a nutraceutical. And then functional food concentrates were a very different concept. Here, what we were trying to do is promote function of the individual to improve their function, reduce their biological age, and get them into a state where they had higher resilience to illness and that they had higher vitality. So we weren't supplementing the diet that was deficient. We weren't treating a disease. We were really focused on improving a person's functional health. And I think that's a really important differentiation. Now, why do functional food concentrates do that, and nutraceuticals and dietary supplements, why don't they do that? It's because using the balance of nutrients that are present in foods, which are literally hundreds of different nutrients that you'll find in any food that are capable of improving human function, by retaining those with a selective kind of manufacturing process that concentrates them without damaging them, it allowed us then to concentrate the goodness, the health and functional vitality out of the food in a way that we could have lower potency of nutrients but higher functional effects on the body because of the synergy. And that synergy is a little, again, like I use the analogy of an orchestra, where you might have an orchestra where you only had one player in the orchestra, was say a violinist. And let's say that violinist was the world's best violinist, and they could play very, very well, but they didn't have all the other instruments in the orchestra to make them sound even better. So one violin would be like, say, one nutraceutical. But when you put all the other instruments in the orchestra together, now that violin doesn't need to play as loud because it's playing along with all the other instruments that make the sound of the music much more enjoyable and at higher function. So that's a functional food concentrates. It has all the members of the orchestra, so no one instrument has to be the lead. You're really then using lower energy of each of the instruments to produce the symphony of orchestra that promotes improved function. So that's a functional food concentrate versus a nutraceutical.
As we know, some products are selling their nutrients in a very high dosage, and FFC does it. So what makes FFC so special, and what's the uniqueness about FFC versus other brands?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. You know, there are many different approaches towards treatment of a disease, if you have a disease, with different kinds of drugs. And when we use the term nutraceutical, it suggests that what we're doing is using a nutrient to treat a disease like we would use a pharmaceutical to treat a disease. And as you probably know, in the treatment of a disease with a drug, there are different potencies that are used, different dosages for different diseases depending upon the severity of the disease. So that model of nutraceuticals is really a very medical model of treating a disease with a nutrient in such a way that the potency is required to be quite high in order to treat that condition. A functional food concentrate has a wholly different philosophy, and it's built on a different principle. In this case, what we're saying is that everyone knows that certain foods have certain health-giving characteristics. And in those foods, there are a whole array of unique nutrients in that food that were made through the process of its own basis on genetics and its history of use that are health promoting. It's not one nutrient in that food. It may be hundreds, it may be in some cases even thousands of little amounts of certain nutrients that work together synergistically to improve the functional health of the person. So in the functional food concentrate concept, the ability then to concentrate this full array, the full orchestration, the full suite of all these compounds, all these substances in the food, so that they would do what they're normally supposed to do, why they were put in the plant to begin with, to work together to activate the function of the individual. It's not like one nail with a hammer that you're hitting, like a nutraceutical. It's an array of different voices of these different nutrients in the food that are all influencing then how function of that organism, that individual is going to be received. That then raises the whole vitality of the nutraceutical to a different form to become a functional food concentrate. And its application then is improving the function of the individual, not just treating a disease.
Do you have any simple example to show this example to show the difference between FFC and the single nutrients such as vitamin C, or we just use vitamin C or we use FFC. Is there any difference?
Yeah, I think that vitamin C would be a very good example. I happen to know a reasonable amount about vitamin C, having worked with Linus Pauling, who is probably the father of vitamin C becoming a well-known nutrient. So vitamin C in nature, it's called ascorbic acid. And the reason it's called ascorbic acid is it was first discovered to treat a disease called scurvy. So scurvy is a disease associated with the absence of adequate intake of vitamin C. So they called it ascorbic acid, ascorbic acid. And so it was there to prevent and treat scurvy. And as you probably know, scurvy was a dreaded problem with sailors in the navies of the world that traveled around in the oceans and for many weeks and months, and they would not have any access to good food, and they would eventually develop this. They would start bleeding, their teeth would become loose, their joints would become very flexible and sore, and it ultimately could lead to their death by this lack of vitamin C. You can treat the disease, scurvy, with a very small amount of vitamin C. Generally less than 20 milligrams a day of vitamin C could treat the disease scurvy. So you could consider having a nutraceutical of vitamin C at a high potency to treat a deficiency of vitamin C, and therefore that would be a nutraceutical application. But in nature, in foods where you find vitamin C, you find it with many other nutrients. And in fact, Albert St. Georgi, another Nobel Prize winner, discovered that vitamin C in foods came along with a whole other family of substances called bioflavonoids. And these flavonoids he actually termed substance P, or vitamin P. And the reason they call them P is because these substances were found to work with vitamin C to prevent our capillaries and our veins of our body from breaking down. They strengthen the integrity of our blood vessels. And that P stands for permeability, meaning that when the blood vessels broke down, they become more permeable or leaky. So he called these substance P or vitamin P. Vitamin P, these flavonoid factors, works together with vitamin C synergistically in a whole food concentrate to have bigger effects than just prevention of scurvy. And so if you want to really have a functional effect, you would use a functional food concentrate that would have all these players. It would have the flavonoids with vitamin C working together to create this broader effect than just vitamin C alone. So that would be the difference between a nutraceutical high-potency vitamin C and a functional food concentrate that had the full orchestration of factors.
Dr. Brand, how do we know that we are buying FFC? I mean, is there any standard to identify what is FFC?
Yeah, so you know, in 1991-92, when we came up with the concept of functional food concentrates through the discussion between myself and the founders of New Life, no one else had ever used that term. So we kind of came up with a new designation. That's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, right? Because there is no standard at that point. We're defining a new term. So I think that the challenge that we had at first was to make very clear what was the difference between a functional food concentrate and a nutraceutical or dietary supplement, and how would you determine whether it was truly in that category. And what we finally came up with over time was it has to do with your attention to your quality assurance and your selection of ingredients and your manufacturing process and where you get your ingredients from. First of all, you have to certify where your plants are coming from for which you are going to concentrate their nutrients. So you have to go back to the source. Secondly, you have to then look at how those nutrients are then concentrated from that food. And so you have to know something about the process of the concentration, and you have to have quality assurance standards for that. Then third, you have to have analytical procedures to understand what are the nature of the substances in that complex matrix, because you're going to have many different parts of that functional food concentrate that are represented as part of its composition. And then you have to use those in order to do proper stability testing, because it might be really fresh right at first, but maybe the potency goes away. So you have to have ways of doing what we call stability testing or expiry dating, so that you'll know how long those principles in the concentrate will remain active. So that's a whole series of steps that over time, New Life International, working with us, was able to start to develop a procedure and a standard which did not exist before for what constitutes a functional food concentrate. And I think now over the last 27 years, those standards have become much more well understood. They can be written down, they can be properly identified. But again, it actually comes back to the integrity of the company, how the company polices or executes on its own standards, how committed it is to maintenance of those standards, from the growing to the concentration to the dating to the analytical potency testing. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited about working with New Life, because I knew they had a group of people that were really committed to the quality and the integrity of the concept.
Brian, how do people know that whether I should take FFC?
You know, it's very interesting, isn't it, for all of us when we think about our health, that if you ask a person just in a conversation, do you feel healthy? Most people say, oh yeah, I'm healthy. But then in their private moments, when they're not feeling that they could be judged and they're being very honest, maybe just with themselves, they'll say, oh, gee, you know, I'm healthy, but there's some things I don't like. I have a skin rash, or I've got a runny nose, or I get headaches, or I feel fatigued, or I'm not sleeping well, or I seem to have a lot of allergies, or I get the cold every time it comes around, or you know, I just don't have the sense of vitality, or my muscles seem sore like they shouldn't be when I'm not even exercising that much. There are all these different symptoms that people might have that they wouldn't necessarily tell you. If you ask them, how do you feel, they'll say, oh, I'm healthy. Those are the kinds of things, those what I call functional aspects of the health, that really relate to the functional food concentrates. Because what we're doing with functional food concentrates is providing the materials the body needs in order to function at its best, to go beyond just the prevention of a disease or go beyond just the treatment of an illness, to actually building the body's resilience, its reserves, its capability of functioning when it is under stress or when it has been exposed to an infectious bacterium or a virus, so that the body can be tough and resilient, and you don't wake up feeling tired in the morning, you don't go to sleep feeling tired, you don't have the soreness and the low energy and the cognitive abilities to think clearly. All of those things are part of our function, which is why we have functional food concentrates. They really provide that gap between maybe what we're eating and what we need to regulate our function at a much higher level.
Dr. Brand, in your point of view as expert in health scientist, what's the real meaning of health?
Yeah, isn't that an important question? It has been debated for so long. How do you really get your hands on health, and what is it? And I think that health is a very complex word, because I believe it means different things to different people. For one person, maybe being healthy would be able to go to the graduation of their grandchild from school. Another person maybe is trekking in the Himalayas. For another person, maybe is being a very good student. For another person, it may be running a marathon. I mean, there could be many different ways that we would individually personalize our definition of being healthy. I think that if we were to really look at how we measure health, we measure it through our function. When a person says they're healthy, what they're really saying is, I'm functioning at a high level. And then that begs the question, so what is function? And function, I think, is divided into 4 categories. And I think you can define function on the basis of your physical function, your muscle strength, your bones and tendons and all the things that make you active. The second would be your metabolic or your physiological function, how the inner workings of your physiology is working, controlling blood sugar, controlling your blood fats, all of those kinds of things. The third kind of function would be your cognitive function, how you're thinking and how you process information. And then the last, fourth form of function, which is equally important, would be kind of your spiritual or your behavior or your psychological function, how you're seeing yourself in connection to the world. Those four parts of function then in each person go together to form their overall health. I call that their aggregate health. And so if a person says, you know, I'm not so concerned about my psychological function, but I am concerned about my metabolic function because someone told me I've got bad blood sugar, then we would focus a functional food concentrate on improving that form of function, which would be your metabolic function. Another person might say, you know, I'm just not seeming to think clearly, and I'm losing my memory a little bit, and I'm not as clear as I used to be. So now we would say, oh, for you, your function should be focused on cognitive function. So we ought to use a functional food concentrate and a program more designed to that. So it gives you a way of better determining the individual natures of function that relate to health in that person, not just saying, are you healthy? That really is a term that doesn't take you anywhere. If we start breaking it down into individual types of function, then we can start personalizing it with certain functional food concentrates and personal programs to achieve those individual health benefits.
Dr. Brand, we all have different genes. How does our genes relate to the need of FFC?
So let's talk about our genes just for a second. What are our genes? Our genes are the most precious thing that we own. They differentiate us from anyone else that has ever been born or anyone else that ever will be born. Think of that concept. Of all the people that have ever been born and all the people that will be born, there will never be anyone exactly like us. Now, what does that really say our genes are? Our genes are our book of life. Our genes are our book of life. There are 23 chapters in our book of life that represent the 23 pairs of chromosomes that make up our genes. Half of each chapter is written by our biological mother, the other half by our biological father. They're paired together in the 23 pairs of chromosomes. They won't tell us who we are. They tell us who we could be. In our genes, in our book of life, is not an exact story of who we are, how we will be well or how we will be sick, whether we'll be smart, whether we'll be successful, whether we'll be beautiful, whether we will be having a great life or having problems. None of that is in our genes. What is in that, in our genes, is all those opportunities. The book can be read many ways. It can be read either as a story of great success or it can be read as a book of tragedy, based upon how we treat our genes, through how we eat, live, act, think, breathe, drink, move. All of those things tell our book of life how it's going to read the story of our life. Now think of what that means. It means that if we understood enough about our book of life, our uniqueness, and we did the right things to make that story of our life become a wonderful adventure story, a love story, a success story, out we would come as this bright, bright human being. But if we then did all the wrong things based on our genes, the story that we would read would be entirely different. We would have a very difficult life. We'd have more problems with illness and so forth. And so the functional food concentrate gives us the ability to match those particular nutrients that are important for bringing out the best in our genes, for reading our book of life so that it's a good story, not a bad story. That gives us a lot more control over our health than we ever thought possible. In the past, we might have said, oh, my father had a heart attack. Oh, my mother had breast cancer. It's in my genes. There's nothing I can do. I didn't even fill out an application card. I just got my genes. I didn't even have a chance to select my genes. But no, we can select in how we live, how our genes will be expressed into how we look, act, and feel. And our functional food concentrates are there to support our genes in our story of life being a story of adventure, of success, not a story of illness and tragedy. So they're an important part of personalizing our functionality and our health over our life.
How does FFC help to make the right expression?
Oh boy, now that's something scientists have only discovered within the last 20 years. In fact, since New Life started, that discovery is one of the major scientific discoveries. It turns out that these nutrients found in functional food concentrates talk to our genes, speak to our genes in very specific ways, with specific language and specific dialect, through a series that the term is called signal transduction. That's the scientific term. What it really means is specific members of the phytonutrient family that are found in functional food concentrates activate specific processes that go to the genes and turn on certain messages to be read. The messages of no inflammation, improved immunity, improved vitality, better energy utilization. They turn on and turn off certain aspects of our book of life to regulate our function. It's an amazing breakthrough in understanding, because before we didn't understand how nutrients could actually do more than just prevent deficiency. Now we actually know how they improve function. This in the last 20 years has been the most significant breakthrough in making nutrition scientific, taking it from the kitchen into the area of science.
Dr. Brand, for the last 27 years, what leads you in the interest in helping people in China?
Yeah, sometimes I've been asked that question by people saying, well, you're from the United States and you have a different culture and you have a different series of problems in health than we do in China, so why would you be interested in what's going on in China? I think there's so many reasons for that, that I'm interested. I mean, let's first of all look culturally. So many of the great ideas were born out of China. If we look at the history of China in art and music and literature and science and cultural development and civilization, it was really born out of China. So there's a center of greatness in the country of China. Secondly, which by the way can be a very great teacher, and I've learned a lot, I think, in my 27 years about the culture and the history of China. Secondly, there is this concept that China is the most populated country in the world. So if you're really worried about world health and survival of the people of the world, you have to be worried about China because it's such an important part of the world population. Thirdly is the concept that really sometimes you understand yourself better by understanding others, because it forces you to take on a different perspective. So learning about traditional Chinese medicine and its cultural development, and then viewing back to the Western model, which I was trained in, gives me a whole different view of my own training, and it enriches my ability, I think, to help and serve people in a better way. So I think that there is both a sense of the enjoyment of helping others, but there's also the selfish thing of learning a lot about people through interacting with cultures other than your own. So I feel very, very fortunate to have the association with New Life and all of you, and the lessons that you've taught me and how I've been introduced in different ways to traditional Chinese medical history and health habits and nutrition habits of traditional China. I mean, look at the Chinese diet historically was one of the best diets in the world. So now we come back and we start to reapply these. Some people say this is like back to the future, right? We're learning old things in new ways. And some people would say, well, we already knew this. Well, yes, maybe we did, but we forgot it. And we have to be reintroduced. And these principles are applicable across the whole world. It doesn't matter what your race or country of origin is. They're applicable across the whole world. So I feel very fortunate to take what I have known and to help people in China, as I'm learning from China, to help people elsewhere. So I think it's a wonderful mixture of opportunities.
So, Dr. Brand, as we know that you are already retired, so do you have any further goal in your coming future?
Yeah, I think the term retired is a term that probably doesn't fit at all for most people today. If they can maintain their health, they will always have the opportunity to learn new things, to do new things, to explore, to be useful. And for me, retire really means putting new tread on my tire, doing new things, helping people more, using the experience that I had to help other people who maybe not have yet learned certain things that I've learned. So for me, it's mentoring. You go through differing phases of your life. This is why I've started 5 new companies. It's why I'm involved with a variety of different things, because now I can mentor. My children are already growing up. My grandchildren now are growing up. They have their education for university already paid for. My wife and I have a life that's very comfortable. So now it's all about service. It's all about not worrying about what we had to do to keep the lights on and put food on the table. Now it's about how can we mentor, how can we help, how can we contribute. The world has a lot of challenges, and people are seeking solutions to challenges. And you would like to leave the world to be better than that which you found it. And so I think that it's a lifelong process to the last breath that we take to give back to the privilege we've had for living.
We are so glad to have such a great scientist as you.
Well, thank you. I feel so privileged to be part of the New Life Extended family. Thank you.